Now this question here, some people find very difficult, but it is relatively straightforward. The key thing here is how useful are sources A and B to a historian studying the success of the 5-year plans. You must answer the question. So how useful are they in answering a specific question? Now what we look at when we're thinking about usefulness is we look at the content, the origin, and the purpose, or COP. Now some other people will know it as, are they reliable, therefore they're useful, and are they accurate? Either one is okay, but I like content, origin, and purpose. So first of all, what you've got to do is you've got to think about the question. So how useful are they in answering a question? So how useful are sources A and B to help a historian studying the successes of the 5-year plans? So, first thing we can look at, for example, is, are they useful based on the origin and purpose or the reliability of the source? So, source A is from a speech given by Stalin himself in January 1933. And the second one is a propaganda poster from 1938. So, the origin of source A is that it is a speech by Stalin given on the 7th of January 1933. What's the purpose of this speech? The purpose of this speech is to make the 5-year plan sound like a success because Stalin wants to use this as propaganda. Source B, it says, is a propaganda poster. It's made in 1938. It's entitled Peasants Can Live Like a Human Being. And again, the purpose of this poster is to show these happy peasant family and all the good things that the 5-year plans have done. So, are they useful to a historian studying the 5-year plans because of who wrote them, when they were written, and what the purpose is? Now, source B is in 1938. So this tells us more about the 5-year plans because it's later in the series from 1928 to 1941. This is actually part of the third 5-year plan. So this might be useful in telling us about the third 5-year plan. The first one is reporting on the success of the first 5-year plan in 1933. Stalin would obviously emphasize the good points, make it sound like a success, but perhaps it is useful in that way. Now the second part of this question is it useful based on what we know about the text and perhaps also what's missing? Now source A, for example, talks about the success of the national economy and that 93.7% of the plan had been fulfilled. Whereas source B shows us that peasants could have record players, they were taught how to read, and they had nice clothes and they were happy. Now source A might be useful for us because we know that output did actually increase. Now with your own knowledge, you would support that by saying output of grain or output of steel increased from so-and-so and so-and-so between those years. Therefore, I know that this is useful because it tells us the truth. Source B, for example, we do know that the third 5-year plan did look to educate peasants and teach them how to read, so therefore it's useful. But what we've also got to have a look at are what are the limitations of the source. Now, source A, for example, tells us nothing about the human costs of the 5-year plans. The liquidation of the kulaks, the number of people who froze to death building Magnitogorsk. And in the same way, this one tells us nothing about the human cost at all. So, you compare the two sources based on their origin and purpose or their reliability. That's one paragraph. And then you compare the text or the content of the source. Is it useful? Is it accurate? Does it link to our own knowledge? Or are there limitations to the source? That's how you answer an 8-mark question. This is another example of an 8-mark question where it's explaining how useful are sources A and B for a historian exploring the reasons for Stalin's success in gaining total power by 1929. Now again, you need to answer the specific question. That's really, really important because if you don't answer the specific question, you really won't do that well. Now, what again are we looking for? First thing that we do is we think about our COP, content, origin and purpose, or reliability and accuracy, depending on which way you want to look at it. So if we're thinking about our origin and our purpose, source number 1 is an eyewitness account by an American of Lenin's funeral in 1924. Second one is a speech to the Communist Party by Stalin in October 1929. Okay, so first of all, the question asks us, how useful are they in exploring the reasons for Stalin's success by 1929? Now, source B is in 1929, so it covers the whole period. Source A is only in 1924. So source A might be useful for the early part, but it isn't useful after then, whereas source B takes us right up till 1929. Now, this is by an American eyewitness, source A. So he was there at the time. If he's an American, perhaps he's less likely to be pro-Stalin, pro-Lenin. Therefore, it might be a more objective account. Now, this is a speech from Stalin. Now, usually would suggest that that wouldn't be useful because maybe it was propaganda or something like that. But in this case, when we're exploring the reasons for Stalin's success, because it's from him, it actually might be really useful to help explain why he was successful. Now, the second part of this is thinking about what it says. Now, source A, for example, talks a lot about the funeral, the fact that Trotsky was absent, okay, and that Stalin was the one who looked like he was going to take over from Lenin. We know that that is accurate. We know that Lenin didn't attend the funeral. But if we're thinking about what's missing or the limitations, it mentions nothing after 1924. It mentions nothing about the triumvirate. It mentions nothing about Kamenev and Zinoviev. It mentions nothing about how Stalin won the power struggle by 1929. This one, on the other hand, source B, it does go into greater detail. It says that Stalin has got rid of traitors and capitalist agitators, that he's driven the enemies of the revolution out, and it says about the Communist Party voting to expel these threats. Now, we know that Stalin did all of these things. He drove out the enemies, Trotsky, Zinoviev, Kamenev, Bukharin. He did use the Communist Party to expel his threats. Okay, so this is useful in telling us about some of the things that Stalin did. But it's not useful because it doesn't mention the funeral. It doesn't mention Lenin's testament. So there are limitations to that. That's how you answer an 8-mark source question on the Russia-Soviet Union paper.